What's up, MetaNerds? This video is all about the SPHA, the Self-Propelled Heavy Artillery. If you're like me, the first time you saw this at the Battle of Geonosis, it blew you away with its immense size. And its size is pretty amazing, but there's a bunch of other cool things about this vehicle, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. Like all of the other walkers used by the Republic during the Clone Wars, the SPHA was also made by Rathana Heavy Engineering, that company that was owned by Kuat Drive Yards, which would later make the AT-AT and the AT-ST. And when it comes to Canon material, the SPHA was by far the largest walker to ever be used by the Republic or Imperial forces. To illustrate just how crazy big this thing was, picture this. The terrifying behemoth that was the AT-AT was about 20 meters long, whereas the SPHA was 140 meters long, or about 459 feet. This makes it nearly as long as some World War II destroyers, and longer than 22 TIE fighters back to back. And at 20 meters or 67 feet tall, it was just a little bit shorter than an AT-AT. So what did they use to get this giant thing moving? Pretty simple. They just slapped 12 legs on the thing and let it crawl across the battlefield. Of course, this thing wasn't very fast, with a top speed of only 35 kilometers per hour or 21 miles per hour, which means the mighty SPHA would have a hard time getting a ticket in a school zone. But of course, this thing wasn't about speed, it was about providing heavy artillery. And what's really cool is that artillery could change depending on the battlefield. Rathana Heavy Engineering was clever in making sure that the SPHA had a modular design. This meant that the main weapon on top could be swapped out, and it had the option of a turbolaser, ion cannon, anti-vehicle laser, concussion missile launcher, or a mass driver cannon like we see on the AT-TE and the LA-AT. In addition to this, the SPHA had 12 anti-personnel blasters, which were equally spaced around the body of the vehicle, in hopes of fending off any infantry that might try and sneak up on the slow-moving walker. And it's said to be able to transport 30 clone troopers into battle, which is kind of surprisingly low, considering that the AT-AT wasn't nearly as long, but could carry 40 troops. The SPHA's troopers could quickly be deployed by using a hatch that would open up on the bottom of the vehicle. And a kind of cool feature is that these troopers could then use its giant legs as cover. And for the deployment of the SPHA itself, it obviously couldn't use LA-ATs like the AT-TE did. Instead, the SPHA was delivered into battle via the Acclimator class assault ships. And what was terrifying for CIS forces is that one assault ship could carry up to 36 SPHAs. Once these were all deployed into battle, they would get orders from forward command posts like we see on Geonosis. And the Republic's typical game plan was to have the LA-ATs and AT-TEs be the main offensive force, and then the assault ship would drop in a whole bunch of SPHAs, making sure that the Republic forces were able to hold on to whatever they already captured. The SPHAs would then provide extra cover, and were especially useful for taking out much larger targets that the LA-ATs and AT-TEs couldn't take out on their own. And we see the SPHA used exactly how it was designed during the opening of the Clone Wars at the Battle of Geonosis. The massive SPHA was not intended to take out ground troops or other offensive vehicles. Instead, it's put to perfect use against a core ship. What you might not have known when watching the movie is that taking down these core ships was incredibly important. Since this was the opening battle of the Clone Wars, this was the Republic's chance to get a huge head start. These core ships were filled with thousands of battle droids, super battle droids, all kinds of vehicles, and especially deadly heavy weapons. Taking out these core ships was the equivalent of wiping out whole battalions of droid forces. But if you pay attention to how the SPHA fires and how they're all organized, it also shows you a weakness of the SPHA. One is that this massive turbolaser needed some time to charge, and so the SPHAs would have to be grouped up so that they could have alternating volleys to make sure that the enemy was under constant attack. The second is that this gun is so massive and required such a large reactor that Rathana Engineering didn't think that they should work in a turret option. In other words, that main gun there can't swivel, it can't spin around, so the SPHA can only shoot forward. It can raise or lower that main gun, but it can't go left or right. So the walker slowly has to turn until it's in the right position to shoot down its enemy. But when used against the right target, it's not too big of a problem. And despite having extremely thick plate armor, during the 2003 Clone Wars TV show, during the Battle of Munilist, we see that Lancer droids are able to take out the SPHA a little too easily. But what's really cool is that the SPHA also makes an appearance in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The Venator-class Star Destroyer was able to carry tons of vehicles, including tons of SPHAs. Anakin Skywalker realized that simply by relocating some of these SPHAs, they could fire out of the hangar bay located on the bottom of the Star Destroyer. So in this scene here, we see the Venator class is above the much smaller Munificent class Star Frigate, and when that turbolaser blast comes out of the SPHA, it's instrumental in taking down the smaller CIS ship. And that's the last time we ever see the SPHA, though the Galactic Empire did continue to use them after the Clone Wars. But they didn't use them for very long. They eventually adapted them into the SPMA. These were the self-propelled medium artillery, which were much lighter and quicker, but still had a pretty respectable heavy turbolaser cannon. They were able to make these smaller and lighter due to advances in the actual alloy materials used to build them. So that's it for the SPHA's history, but before you go, I want to go over some cool facts and some behind the scenes stuff. Part of the reason why I could only carry 30 troops in the battle is because the reactor for the turbolaser was so incredibly gigantic and dangerous. It required a crew of 15 clone troopers who piloted the vehicle, operated the turbolaser, but also had to monitor and make sure that the reactor core didn't fail. And Orthana Engineering built this vehicle by thinking of the weapon first. They knew the kind of damage they wanted to output, created the giant turbolaser, and then they figured out how to make a vehicle large enough to house the thing and get it around the battlefield. The SPHA was also the inspiration for the RX-200 Falchion class stun tank. And what's cool is that originally, the SPHA was drawn to look like a treaded vehicle, something like a massive tank, but George Lucas wanted it to be a walker. It's kinda his thing, I guess. And interestingly, the SPHA's production name was Clone Tank A, which makes me think that it must have been the first tank conceived of for the Republic forces. But that's it for the SPHA, or the Self-Propelled Heavy Artillery. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, and be sure to leave a comment down below if I missed any cool facts, or if you have a suggestion for future videos. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at MetaNerdz so you can see us build Star Wars props and cosplays, along with some other cool Star Wars stuff. If you want to help support this channel, check out the description below for our Amazon store and our Patreon. And be sure to subscribe, because we're making videos like this every single day. But most important of all, remember, the great words of Jedi Master Confucius once said, never put all your eggs in one basket, and don't leave thousands of droids in one core ship when there's SPHAs around. And the Force will be with you, always.